Well, hello and welcome to ID Talk, answers from an infectious diseases expert. I'm Dr. Sean Elliott, a pediatric infectious disease specialist with Tucson Medical Center, professor emeritus of pediatrics at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, and a leader at the Arizona chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. This podcast has been created to answer questions from our chapter's members about the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the week of November 2nd, and today, as I'm recording this, is Election Day, November 3rd. In the United States, as of this morning, we have 9.3 million total cases and 231,665 deaths. That compares to the global total of over 47 million cases of COVID-19 and 1.2 million deaths. Looking more locally into pediatrics, the AAP releases its weekly report, and this data is from October 29th, where we had a total of 853,635 pediatric COVID cases. That again is birth through a varying upper range of age from 14 years to 20 or even 21 years. That means that calculates to 11.1% of the total COVID-19 cases in the United States are in that large pediatric range. In Arizona specifically, our cumulative caseload for COVID-19 is 33,985, or 14.1% of the total. Arizona specifically records COVID cases from birth 0 years of age through 20 years of age. So as always, keep in mind the caveat, this number does include some of our college age first and second years. The overall rate per 100,000 pediatric age range in Arizona is 1,848. That's per 100,000 kids. That compares to the national average of 1,134 pediatric cases per 100,000 population in the pediatric age range. That national average number, that national rate, is much increased from where it was even 3 weeks ago, where it was in the mid 800s or so per 100,000. Not surprisingly, this reflects the explosion of cases seen in other parts of this country, especially in the Midwest and parts of the Southeast, related to a second surge, which many other states are now experiencing. In Arizona, we are testing, or of our total tests, 14.6% are on that pediatric age range, and of the tests sent, 13.4% are positive. So again, we're testing a good number of patients in the pediatric age range, and if only 13% or a little bit more are positive, that's good. That hopefully means that we're casting a wide net and not missing anybody. The total number of deaths from birth to 20 in Arizona is stable at 9. At one point, it was as high as 12, but the other 3 cases have been reclassified as not being due specifically to COVID-19. So we have a couple questions to answer today. The first is, can I discuss the new routine vaccine recommendations for people with diagnosed or suspected COVID-19? So that there are a couple components to this question, and it's a very important one. The first is, at what point after a patient has had COVID-19 might they be considered safe or effective to provide a routine pediatric immunization? And the answer, based on available data, is no different than that with any other respiratory illness, meaning we want them to be afebrile, asymptomatic, and recovered from the symptoms. I think reasonably we can apply the current isolation standard as identified by the CDC, which is 10 days out from onset of symptoms. So once the patient is 10 days or more from when they were diagnosed with or developed symptoms of COVID-19, we can consider them to be safe to immunize. How effective that will be remains an unanswered question. And this part of the question has to do with any theoretic immunosuppression caused by the viral infection itself. To date, there does not appear to be a high rate of secondary infections associated with COVID-19 or infection with SARS-CoV-2 in the pediatric population. In fact, in any population, and this has been studied extensively in adults who are hospitalized in an ICU setting. Typically, hospitalization in an ICU for any indication is frequently associated with a higher than expected onset of hospital-acquired infections, many of which are bacterial in nature. However, that has specifically not been demonstrated in the observational studies to date. And that observation applies to pediatrics as well. In fact, now several studies globally have looked at the incidence and or attack rate of routine pediatric bacterial infections unrelated to COVID-19 or not, and found the overall numbers are significantly decreased. And that applies to acute otitis media, streptococcal pharyngitis, sinusitis, urinary tract infections, and bacterial pneumonias. In fact, and again, this continues to be demonstrated globally as well, the incidence of routine viral respiratory infections also is significantly decreased. So bronchiolitis due to RSV or other viral causes, croup due to parainfluenzas, adenovirus, you name it, the number of other routine pediatric infections that normally would start to inundate our offices, emergency departments, and hospitals right now in November have not been reported. So that would suggest, by extension, that number one, social distancing, masking, etc., has been effective, at least in reducing the amount of secondary or additional infections. But number two, it would suggest that there is not an extreme or significantly unusual immunosuppression caused by infection with SARS coronavirus 2. Therefore, it makes sense that, as with any other febrile illness, that once the child is recovered, they should be considered a safe and effective vaccine candidate. So that's part one to this important question. Part two, though, is what are the recommendations in the setting of the pandemic right now? And here, both CDC and the American College of Immunization Practices, ACIP, are noting especially the high potential for missed routine vaccinations or delay of vaccine schedule due to the patients not coming to their routinely scheduled preventative health care visits. This, as I think we all know, is a huge concern and has been the focus of much writing and media releases by the AAP and by the CDC. So of that concern, there are three specific elements that are noted by the CDC and the ACIP. The first, and I think quite honestly the most important, is how to capture and then provide catch-up immunizations to those patients who have not been able to or chosen not to come to their routine scheduled preventative health care visits. And so everybody, AAP and everyone else, recommends a deliberate or a specific identification of patients who now are delayed in their vaccine schedule and a deliberate contact of those children or adolescents and their families and a specific scheduling for a vaccine visit, thinking that patients who are vaccine delayed for whatever reason may continue to remain so, as they may not on their own find their way back to our offices. So the major recommendation here is to create a deliberate screening of our practices, identify those children and teenagers who are vaccine delayed, and bring them in specifically to begin a catch-up immunization schedule. That catch-up immunization schedule is no different than what's normally published every year and can be accessed through the AAP's website, through the CDC. You can Google search it. But basically, if you don't already have access to that schedule published every year in pediatrics, find it, and the vaccine catch-up schedule is the same. That's major issue number one related to vaccine delay. Number two is a special focus on measles vaccination, and I would extend that to measles and mumps, since there have been clusters of cases starting to creep up in the United States and certainly globally. So AAP, CDC, ACIP, alphabet soup basically is saying, focus especially, if you're unable to catch up and immunize anybody else, especially focus on the MMR vaccinations for those children who are at age and need their first and or second doses. And then third is another specific focus on hepatitis B prevention in the infants born to hepatitis B positive mothers. And this is really hailing to the fact that the pandemic has altered significantly our approach to mothers who are or are suspected to be COVID-19 affected. And infants born to those mothers, while if asymptomatic or mildly ill, can still room in and go through normal nursing or breastfeeding practices. Yet there's a concern about a delay of hepatitis B prophylaxis in those infants. So provision of hepatitis B immunoglobulin and the first hepatitis B vaccine to those infants born exposed to mothers with active or chronic hepatitis B disease. So those are the three major changes, and they're not really changes, they're simply just capturing reality and trying to address it. So deliberate addressing of those patients with vaccine delay and providing a catch-up schedule for them, deliberately ensuring that everyone in our practices has received at least their first MMR vaccine and or second if they're old enough, and then ensuring that our neonates born exposed to hepatitis B receive their effective hepatitis B vaccine schedule and the HBIG at birth. So, great first question. Thank you for whoever sent that one. What about the challenge trials ongoing in the United Kingdom in terms of vaccine? So brief description here. A challenge trial for any vaccine is to vaccinate the recipient, now of course obtaining human subjects approval first and consent, but vaccinating the recipient and then deliberately exposing them to the infection of interest. So in this case, in the United Kingdom, as has been talked about globally and in the United States for quite some time, the AstraZeneca trial providing the replication deficient adenovirus vectored SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, they are now recruiting young adults who otherwise have no risks for severe COVID-19 disease, and they are vaccinating them with that product, that vaccine product, and then specifically exposing them to SARS-CoV-2. Why? Well, it kind of makes sense because the attack rate, while significant in this pandemic, is not 100%. And it's sort of a Murphy's Law kind of approach that when one starts to recruit a vaccine recipient population in a community, somehow the numbers of active disease seems to go down. That actually happened here in Tucson, where I'm recording from, and I think similarly in Phoenix, both of which were recruiting sites for the Moderna vaccine, the messenger RNA vaccine. And as soon as recipients were recruited, thankfully, we started to recover from our second surge, and the numbers went down. They are creeping up again. So the rationale behind doing a challenge trial is to sort of supersede any concerns about natural acquisition of or exposure of the virus, and instead deliberately see if the vaccine works. The benefit for that is that the whole process occurs in a controlled setting, so one knows who is exposed, who is not, who had protection from their vaccine, who did not. The ethics of this are a bit challenging, as you can imagine, and they have been cause for extensive debate among both the United States as well as science leaders in other parts of the world, including in the UK. But ultimately, the risks and benefits of such a trial have been evaluated, and the United Kingdom found to support proceeding with the challenge trials. So those have just started, obviously too early to have any results back yet. You'll note that I was asked about my opinion on this issue. My opinion, as a willing volunteer for the Moderna vaccine, an untested, unknown vaccine technology, is that anything that I personally can do to further the science and the evidence to a preventative approach to COVID-19 is for the best. Now, I am probably not considered a low-risk candidate, so I would likely not be recruited into a challenge trial. However, if I were younger and offered, I personally would volunteer. I think that it's important to find the answers which will come from a challenge trial. And that may be bold on my part, but there you go. So that's my opinion. Take it as you will. But the science of the matter is that the ethics have been discussed extensively and found to support proceeding with the challenge trials in the United Kingdom. Not yet so far in the United States. Next question. Patients who have recovered from COVID-19 illness, what are the long-term effects that we're seeing? This refers to the post-COVID-19 syndrome, as it's now being called. Others have formed social support networks under various names, including the long haulers or the COVID survivors, both of which are searchable via Google and or I think social media. What are we seeing in pediatrics? Very similar to what we're seeing in young adults and certainly in older adult populations. And that is that about a third to maybe 40% of COVID survivors, regardless of how severe their COVID-19 illness was, so including those who were mildly ill or even asymptomatic and found after the fact to have been infected, a third to 40% are developing some symptoms within the constellation of the post-COVID syndrome. These include especially significant fatigue, exercise intolerance, dyspnea, persistent or developing of shortness of breath, decreased appetite, persistence of the anosmia, so the loss of sense of smell and secondarily loss of sense of taste for weeks or months after the fact. The COVID cognitive effects are perhaps the most striking. And these are being discussed liberally in the psychiatric and psychological literature. It's not simply just the foggy brain, although that's how it's described by the general public, but specific memory issues, forgetfulness, short-term, mid-term, and even longer-term memory loss. There are now increasing reports of patients presenting to emergency departments with burns from ovens left or stovetops left on, forgetting that they were on, and then putting the hand down in the burner. There have been an increased number of fire department calls for house fires due to the same thing. So very concerning lapses in memory affecting normal daily processing just for normal acts of living, preparing food, forgetting to turn off the oven. This extends, of course, to the school age child, so right back into our neck of the woods, and the inability to have retention of a lesson learned or to perform higher level thinking. So if you can think of a cognitive deficit that you've experienced in your practice, you likely either will or have seen it already in relation to post-COVID recovery. So that's what's out there. And this is not just a matter of days or weeks. This unfortunately is a matter of weeks to months. And there are to this day patients who are 6 to 8 months out from their COVID infection, so acquired it, even early last winter, who still are missing their sense of taste, who still have the fatigue, who still have daytime sleepiness, and or have exercise intolerance. That sounds horrible, by the way, and I hate to share that, but that's what the reality is. There is a slight glimmer of good news, and this is in regarding to the myocarditis, which has been discussed in post-COVID survivors. Initially, there were reports as high as 60 or 70% of COVID survivors who acquired or were found to have myocardial inflammation by cardiac MRI, by echocardiogram, by EKG, showing perhaps left ventricular hypertrophy or other elements of cardiac dysfunction, including dysrhythmias, tachyarrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, etc. The initial reports were concerning for some selection bias, meaning the patients identified had presented to healthcare for some degree of cardiac concern, although reports in other populations, i.e. student athletes, were finding by screening a similarly high number of student athletes with concerning evidence of myocarditis. Now there are ongoing prospective studies in a larger population-based recruitment that are showing the initial estimates maybe are not quite accurate, that while still a real thing, but the percentage risk of myocarditis in a post-COVID survivor is closer to the 20% or so. So still significant, of course, and that still affects or should affect how we treat or deal with our student athletes who are COVID-19 survivors. To refresh our memory, the current AAP recommendations and supported through the universities is to A, recognize that is a risk, B, to perform the symptom screening. So does the student athlete have symptoms of chest pain, palpitations, exercise intolerance, dyspnea, chest tightness, peripheral paresthesias, anything which might trigger the alarm bells for any degree of cardiac dysfunction? If they had mild COVID-19 disease or even asymptomatic and do not have any of those findings, then potentially they can be cleared clinically to return to their sports. Or some would suggest at least doing in the office an EKG, and if the EKG tracing and the parameters and everything else are normal, then clearing them for return to sports. However, having moderate to severe disease and or having presence of some cardiac positive screening symptoms deserves not just the EKG in the office, but referral to cardiology for echocardiography and even consideration of Holter monitoring. So that's kind of where we're at with the post-COVID syndrome. I think as we go further into the pandemic, we'll continue to further identify and nail down specific symptoms and signs which can be expected. Also, what is the expected attack rate of those? Question about the saliva COVID-19 test in general, and then also apparently Costco is offering one. Again, not holding out Costco as a vendor that I support. Oh, we happen to shop there, but if one can purchase large kit sizes of the saliva test, is that a reasonable thing to approach? So in general, the saliva COVID test, which is a PCR-based apparatus, has been head-to-head compared to a healthcare worker solicited nasopharyngeal PCR test and a patient solicited nasopharyngeal PCR test. As it turns out, the saliva test has similar sensitivity and specificity, both of which are really quite good, to the NP swabs when obtained by the healthcare worker. Perhaps not surprisingly, the NP swab obtained by the patient themselves or by a parent is significantly less sensitive, and that of course has to do with technique. I suppose anybody who's faced with the prospect of putting an NP swab up their nose and holding it there for a count of 10 may fudge a little bit because it is not a pleasant thing whatsoever. That said, the saliva test holds great promise, especially in that its sensitivity and specificity have been found to be similar. The specific performance of products offered, in this case by Costco or elsewhere, I don't have information on. However, the technique seems to be quite valid and quite reliable, and that has been tested in a rigorous scientific fashion. So I'm not going to go out on public media as recommending that test, but I think, or at least I hope, you're hearing from me that it's reasonable to consider that as a possible way to proceed with testing. And then the final question, which is actually more of a comment, just sharing experience with parents and teenagers in this person's practice, that they still have loss of taste or smell even when they were infected last July. Yeah, unfortunately, that is absolutely a thing. And how long that will last is variable. There are some individuals that I've talked to, so anecdotal experience, of course, who experience the anosmia, loss of sense of taste and smell, for only a couple weeks, starting from when they are infected, and others who to this day, several months in, still things taste funny. We've discussed before some people who say that everything tastes like garlic. That doesn't surprise me. If there's any alteration in the neuronal conduction affecting processing of sense of smell, it makes sense that one would have abnormalities in perhaps taste, what's called taste perversion. So, sweet tastes sour, or salty tastes, peppery, something like that. So there may be those who are experiencing unusual flavors or smell tastes related to their altered sense of taste and smell. That's entirely possible. I wish I could offer some insight based on the available literature for how long that will last, and all I can say is it's variable, and all we can do in response to that is to provide emotional support and counseling. So that is where we stand today. Vaccine, just brief update. I think we've all seen in the media that both messenger RNA vaccine products are nearing or have completed their recruitment in phase 3 trials. The anticipation is that their safety and efficacy data will be provided to the FDA for an emergency use authorization assessment sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and that potentially vaccine products may be released and distributed in a prioritized fashion, state by state, as early as December. Certainly Arizona has a plan. The Arizona Department of Health Services has reached out to and incorporated the specific approach by the various county health departments, and the county health departments have been reaching out to hospitals and clinical sites as well. There ultimately will be likely no fewer than 5 to 10,000, or maybe a little bit more, doses of a vaccine in the first release to each state, including Arizona, which means that locally the people or healthcare providers at highest risk of exposure will be first designated to receive vaccine. That would include, of course, our colleagues, both physicians and nursing and other ancillary support in the emergency departments would be first in line, followed by those working in specifically identified COVID units and or ICUs. First round, followed hopefully shortly thereafter by additional doses. Importantly, the messenger RNA vaccine, just by its design and the way that it's created, is much more rapidly created and produced than are the virally vectored vaccines, in which you have to raise those vaccines much as you grow them in fibroblast cells. So the messenger RNA vaccines will be easier to produce additional doses, so that in ongoing waves of vaccine, many of us, and hopefully all of us in the healthcare field, can anticipate vaccination as early as next spring and ongoing rolling out to the rest of the population by next summer. Pediatrics specifically, I think we saw the news release that Pfizer, the maker of one of the messenger RNA vaccines, has now lowered its recruitment in phase 3 trials to the age of 12, so that young adults or tweens are now being recruited into the safety studies. We can anticipate safety and efficacy data from that maneuver in the next 3 months or so. So hopefully an indication for pediatric vaccination, at least in teenagers, will be rolling out by next spring as well. Other vaccine products, the AstraZeneca product, briefly discussed or mentioned from the United Kingdom, has gone live again in the United States. That is not yet confirmed, but apparently the FDA has received the data from the independent review board looking at the suspected transverse myelitis case in the United Kingdom related to that vaccine, and approval or permission has been given to restart the phase 3 trial. Janssen Pharmaceuticals, the Johnson & Johnson product, is currently on hold for their single-dose adenoviral vector vaccine due to an undescribed safety issue. But it sounds like that may be approved to restart as well. So those are the 4 vaccines in the United States which are closest to completion of the safety studies and the efficacy studies. As noted before, I anticipate we'll see messenger RNA vaccines first to be released, and that could be as early as the next month and a half or so. Fingers crossed. As always, there's a lot more which is developing on a daily to weekly basis. So thank you once again for listening to ID Talk. Arizona AA members can submit questions for future episodes to covid@azaap.org. For more information and resources related to COVID-19 in Arizona, or to learn how to become a member, please visit us at azaap.org. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, stay sane, stay passionate.